It was supposed to be nothing more than a bad decision drowned in whiskey and loneliness. Just a stranger, a bed, and the silence that follows. But the way he looked at me in the morning, like I wasn't just another face in the dark, shattered every defense I thought I had. Ethan wasn't supposed to matter. He wasn't supposed to become anything more than a distraction on a night I swore I'd forget. Yet here I was, standing in the dim glow of dawn in my cramped Brooklyn apartment, watching him pull the blanket around his shoulders as if he didn't belong anywhere. Not even here. And damn it, something inside me cracked. His eyes lingered on me, soft and searching, and I felt something I hadn't in years, like someone finally saw me. The me behind the walls, behind the sarcasm and the reckless nights. I wanted to push him out the door, slam it shut, and pretend he never existed. Instead, I found myself making coffee. You don't have to. Ethan's voice was low, hesitant, almost guilty. I know, I muttered, not looking at him, the sound of the coffee machine filling the silence. But I want to. Ethan was nothing like me. He looked like the kind of man who still believed in small-town dreams, who probably had a family somewhere in middle America that expected him to come home for the holidays, smiling like nothing was broken. He was too clean, too earnest, too good. And me, I was the disaster he should have run from. A collection of mistakes stitched together by late nights. One too many broken promises. And a heart I didn't know how to hand over without it bleeding all over the floor. But when he smiled, tired but real, I forgot all the reasons why this was supposed to end before it began. Do you always bring strangers home? Ethan asked, his tone teasing, but there was a flicker of insecurity underneath. I smirked, leaning against the counter. Only the ones who look like they'd regret it in the morning. He laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that shook me to my core. Because it wasn't mocking or empty, it was real, and it made me want to hear it again. The hours slipped by faster than I wanted. He should have left before sunrise, slipped out like all the others. Instead, he lingered. Instead, we sat with mugs of cheap coffee and traded stories neither of us should have shared with someone we barely knew. He told me about leaving home, about the suffocating weight of expectations, about how he drove across the country just to feel like he could breathe. I told him about the mess I called my life, about the people I loved who stopped loving me back, about how New York was supposed to fix me but instead just gave me more places to hide. There was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding, and that scared the hell out of me. Because if he saw me, really saw me, what reason would he have to stay? When Ethan finally stood by the door, shoes in his hand, my chest tightened. I told myself it didn't matter, that I wouldn't think about him once he walked out. But then he hesitated, looking at me with those goddamn eyes that felt like they were peeling back layers I didn't want uncovered. Thanks for last night, he said quietly. Don't make it sound like I rescued you. I shot back, forcing a grin. Maybe you did, he murmured. And then, before I could stop myself, I reached out. My fingers brushed his wrist. Just a second, just a touch. But it was enough to send a spark I couldn't ignore shooting through me. He didn't pull away. Instead, he looked down at my hand, then back at me, and I swore I saw something shift, like maybe, just maybe, he felt it too. That night was supposed to end. But it didn't. Ethan came back. First with an excuse, forgot his jacket. Then with no excuse at all. And each time, I told myself it was temporary, that the world outside would eventually swallow us back into separate lives, that this thing between us would collapse the way everything in my life eventually did. But every time he looked at me like I was worth saving, it became harder to believe the lie. I wasn't ready for him. I wasn't ready for the way his laughter filled the cracks in my silence, or how his presence made my apartment feel less like a cage and more like a home. I wasn't ready for the tenderness, The intimacy. The way he kissed me like he had all the time in the world and no intention of leaving. But the truth. I didn't care. For the first time in years. I wanted to risk it. Because maybe he wasn't just passing through. Maybe he was the one thing I had been waiting for all along. The days that followed blurred into something I didn't want to name. Ethan slipped into my life like he'd been there all along. Like the corner of my couch belonged to him. Like the sound of his footsteps on the hardwood was just another rhythm of the city I'd grown used to. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but quiet, subtle in the way the air feels different after a storm. I'd wake up to find him leaning against my kitchen counter, stealing sips of my coffee, scrolling through his phone with that sleepy grin that made my chest ache in ways I hated admitting. And then I'd tell myself it was nothing. Temporary. Just comfort until he moved on. But every time he looked at me, every time he laughed at one of my dry jokes, every time his hand brushed mine as he passed me a beer, I knew I was lying to myself. One evening, the city was buzzing outside, neon lights spilling through the blinds, and Ethan and I sat on the floor with pizza between us. "You know this is the worst pizza I've ever had," Ethan said, a smirk playing on his lips as he chewed. "Welcome to New York." I shot back. "Mediocrity is a local specialty." He laughed, tipping his head back, and I caught myself staring longer than I should have. His throat, his jawline, the way his eyes crinkled when he was genuinely amused. "What?" he asked, catching me. "Nothing," I muttered, tearing another slice. But I knew he didn't buy it. That was the thing about Ethan noticed everything. He noticed how I flinched when someone touched on the subject of family. How I always left the TV on at night like I was afraid of silence. How I drank too much on Fridays but barely touched the bottle on Sundays. And he never pushed. He never demanded explanations. He just stayed. One night, after too many beers and not enough restraint, I asked, "Why are you still here?" Ethan looked at me, not with surprise, but with something gentler. "Because I want to be." "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said quietly. "And what I don't know, I'd like to." Something in me cracked wide open then, and I hated it. Because I wanted to believe him, wanted to let him in. But the ghosts of my past whispered that everyone leaves. It wasn't all easy. I'd snap at him for little things, leaving his shoes by the door, humming too loud in the morning, asking about parts of my past I didn't want to revisit. He'd take it with patience, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. And then I'd hate myself for it, for pushing away the only person who made me feel less empty. One night, after an argument about nothing, something stupid about dishes, I slammed the bathroom door and leaned against the sink, staring at my reflection. "What the hell are you doing?" I whispered to myself. "You're going to ruin this too." When I finally stepped out, expecting silence, maybe even an empty apartment, Ethan was still there, sitting on the couch, arms resting on his knees, waiting. "You don't have to stay," I told him, my voice rough. "Maybe I do," he said softly. "Because if I leave, you'll just convince yourself it's what you deserve. And it's not." I didn't know what to say, so I sat down beside him, our shoulders brushing, the quiet between us heavier than any words. The more time passed, the more I found myself craving him. Not just his touch, though God knows that was addicting, the way his hand found the back of my neck when he kissed me, the way his body fit against mine like we were built to fit. But more than that, I craved his presence. The way he filled the empty spaces in my apartment. The way he softened the sharp edges of my days. I wasn't used to that. Wanting someone not just for a night, but for the mornings after. For the afternoons when nothing happened. When we just existed in the same room. Comfortable in the silence. Terrified me, but it also made me feel alive. One Saturday, Ethan dragged me out of the apartment. "We're not spending another weekend locked inside," he declared. He took me to Coney Island. Of all places. The air smelled like salt and fried food. Kids screamed on roller coasters. And the ocean stretched out like a promise I didn't trust. We walked along the boardwalk. Ethan's hand brushing mine but never quite holding it. As if he was waiting for me to decide. "Tell me something real," he said suddenly. I raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "Something you don't usually say. Something you keep locked up." I almost laughed. Almost deflected with some smartass remark. But then I looked at him, really looked at him, and the words slipped out before I could stop them. "I'm scared all the time," I admitted. "That people will see me and realize I'm not worth staying for." Ethan stopped walking. He turned to me, eyes soft but steady. "Then let me prove you wrong." And just like that, on a noisy boardwalk with strangers all around us, he reached for my hand. This time, I didn't pull away. That night, back in my apartment, everything shifted. We kissed like the world was on fire, like we were burning and the only way to survive was to hold on tighter. Clothes fell, skin pressed against skin, and for once, it wasn't about forgetting or numbing or distracting. It was about being seen, completely and entirely, and not running from it. After, tangled in sheets, his head on my chest, I felt the steady rhythm of his breathing. Safe, warm, real. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered, half asleep. And for the first time in years, I almost believed it. Love wasn't supposed to look like this messy, uncertain, terrifying in every quiet moment. The night after Coney Island, Ethan and I slipped into a rhythm that felt dangerously close to domestic. He left his books on my table, his jacket on my chair. His toothbrush appeared in my bathroom like it belonged there. And I told myself it was fine, temporary, that he'd take it all with him when he finally left. But he didn't leave. Instead, we learned each other in ways I hadn't thought possible. How he hated olives on pizza but would pick them off and eat the slice anyway. How he slept curled toward me, always searching for contact even in dreams. How his laughter softened the sharp edges of my anger. And how his silence sometimes spoke louder than his words. And me, I learned that my heart, which I thought had been boarded shut, still knew how to ache for someone else. But nothing that good lasts without a storm. One Thursday evening, I came home later than usual. Work had drained me, and I was already on edge. Ethan was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, humming to himself. The smell of garlic filled the air. "Hey," he said, glancing over his shoulder with that easy smile. "I thought I'd make dinner." Something inside me twisted. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt claustrophobic. The scene was too normal, too safe, too much like something I could lose. "I didn't ask you to," I muttered, dropping my bag harder than I meant to. His smile faltered. "I know. I just thought, well, don't." My voice was sharper than I intended. "Don't play house with me." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan turned off the stove, setting the spoon down carefully. "Is that what you think this is?" he asked, his voice low. I didn't answer, because the truth was, I didn't know what it was. That night, we barely spoke. Ethan slept facing away from me, his back tense under the sheets. I stared at the ceiling, my chest heavy with words I couldn't bring myself to say. The next morning, he was gone. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. He was never supposed to stay anyway. But the longer the apartment sat in silence, the more I realized how much space he had filled, how much emptier everything felt without him. His jacket was still on the chair. His toothbrush was still in the bathroom. and the smell of garlic lingered in the air like a ghost. 2 days passed before I heard from him. A simple text, "We need to talk." My hands shook as I typed back, "Come over tonight." When he arrived, the air between us was charged, heavy with all the things we hadn't said. He stood in the doorway, his eyes tired but steady. "I can't keep guessing what you want," Ethan said quietly. "One moment you let me in, the next you push me away. I'm not a game, and I'm not here for you to decide whether or not I'm worth it." "I never said you weren't worth it," I snapped, more out of fear than anger. "Then what is it?" he asked, frustration breaking through his calm. "What are you so afraid of?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. "That you'll leave like everyone else." The silence stretched. My chest burned with the confession, raw and exposed. Ethan's expression softened. He stepped closer, his voice gentle. "I can't promise forever. No one can. But I can promise this: I don't want to go. Not unless you make me." His honesty undid me. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. "You don't understand. I've screwed up everything good in my life. People don't stay. They get tired. They realize I'm too much. Not enough. Whatever it is. And they go." Ethan sat beside me, not touching, just close enough. "Maybe you've been with the wrong people," he said softly, "because I'm not going anywhere unless you push me out the door." For a long time, I couldn't look at him. My heart warred with every scar, every fear. But when I finally turned my head, his eyes were steady, patient, and so damn full of hope it scared me more than anything else. And I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. The weeks after that conversation weren't perfect. We fought. We made up. I still flinched when things felt too close, too permanent. But Ethan stayed. And slowly, I started to let him. I let him hold me when nightmares pulled me awake at 3 a.m. I let him tease me until my laughter broke through my defenses. I let him see the parts of me I'd kept hidden, the scars and the fears and the guilt. And every time, instead of running, he pulled me closer. One evening, winter settling over the city, we walked home through the snow, our breath fogged in the cold, streetlights painting halos on the ground. Ethan's hand brushed mine once, twice, and then finally, he laced our fingers together. In public, without hesitation. I froze for a second, fear prickling at my skin. What if someone saw? What if? But then I looked at him. His smile was soft, his thumb brushing the back of my hand like a promise. And for once, I didn't care who was watching, because in that moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, I could stop running. That night, as we lay tangled together, Ethan whispered, "Do you still think I'm just a stranger who stayed too long?" I pressed a kiss to his temple, my throat tight with emotion. "No. You're the reason I don't want to be alone anymore." And for the first time, the truth didn't scare me, set me free. The thing about trust is that it never stays quiet for long. It waits, coiled like a storm in the background, until one crack of lightning splits the sky open. For us, that storm came on a Friday night. I hadn't meant to end up at the bar. I hadn't meant to text an old friend, the kind who still lived in shadows I tried to avoid. But the week had been brutal. Work had chewed me up, and my head was spinning with too many what-ifs. What if Ethan realized I wasn't good enough? What if the warmth in his eyes faded? What if this thing we had was just a temporary comfort, like every other failed attempt at love in my past? So I drank. One whiskey, then another, and I hated myself more with each swallow. When Ethan walked in, the air shifted. I saw him before he saw me. His blonde hair was messy from the cold wind, his shoulders tense under his jacket. He scanned the room, his gaze sharp and searching. And when it landed on me, I felt the weight of his disappointment before he even opened his mouth. "Really?" he asked, voice low but heavy as he slid onto the stool beside me. I tried to laugh it off. "What? A guy can't have a drink anymore." "It's not the drink," Ethan said, his jaw tight. "It's the look in your eyes, like you're already halfway out the door." The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I stared down at the glass, at the amber liquid swirling like all the choices I wished I could undo. "You think I don't notice?" Ethan pressed. "Every time things get good, you look for an escape hatch. You sabotage it before it can fall apart on its own." "Maybe because it always does," I snapped, turning toward him. My voice shook with anger I didn't know how to contain. "People leave, Ethan. That's what they do. That's what you'll do." His eyes flashed, hurt and fierce. "Do you even hear yourself? I'm here. I've been here. But you're so busy waiting for me to vanish that you're pushing me away before I even get the chance to prove you wrong." The bar felt too small, too suffocating. I grabbed my coat and stormed outside, the cold air slapping me in the face like punishment. Ethan followed, his footsteps quick behind me. "Stop running from me," he said, his voice breaking through the night. I spun around, anger burning in my chest. "I don't know how not to." The silence that followed was raw, thick with everything we weren't saying. My breath came out in harsh clouds, my hands shaking at my sides. Ethan stepped closer, his expression softer now. "Then let me teach you." But I wasn't ready to hear it. Not then. I walked away, leaving him standing under the streetlight, his face shadowed with something I didn't have the courage to name. Back in my apartment, the silence was unbearable. His jacket still hung on the chair. His toothbrush was still by the sink. Every piece of him lingered, accusing me of the one thing I swore I'd never drive away, the only person who had stayed. And for the first time, I realized the truth. It wasn't Ethan I didn't trust. It was me. Days passed. We didn't talk. The city moved on like it always did, relentless and uncaring. But I was stuck, replaying his words, his eyes, the way his voice cracked when he said "I'm here." I wanted to call him. God, I wanted to. But fear chained me down. Fear that he wouldn't answer, that he'd already decided I wasn't worth the fight. Then, one night, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Ethan stood there. His face was tired, but his eyes, those damn eyes, still held that same stubborn light. "You don't make it easy," he said, his voice rough. "But I'm not giving up on you." I didn't know what to say. My throat was tight, my chest aching. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "I don't know how to be the person you deserve." "Then don't be perfect," Ethan said simply. "Just be real. That's all I've ever wanted." And then, before I could fall back into my doubts, he closed the distance between us. His hand cupped the back of my neck, his forehead pressed against mine, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. "I'm scared," I whispered. "Me too," he murmured. "But maybe that's what makes it worth it." That night, we didn't make love. We didn't need to. Instead, we lay tangled together on the couch, his hand resting over mine, our breaths sinking in the dark. And for the first time, I let myself believe just a little that maybe this wasn't temporary. Maybe this was the beginning of something I didn't have to run from. But the past has a way of finding you when you least expect it. A week later, I got a call I never wanted. My brother. A voice I hadn't heard in years. He was in town. Wanted to meet. The memories came crashing back, shouted words. Slammed doors. The moment my family turned their backs when I needed them most. Shame tightened around my throat. Ethan noticed the change in me immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "Nothing," I lied. But lies don't last long around him. And when the past finally collided with the present, when I was forced to face the family I thought I'd lost forever, Ethan would be there. Not as a stranger who stayed too long, but as the anchor I didn't know I needed. And that was the moment I realized the storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. The call from my brother rattled me more than I wanted to admit. He wanted to meet. After years of silence, of pretending I didn't exist, suddenly he was in New York, asking for a conversation. I almost deleted the message. I almost shoved my phone in a drawer and pretended I never saw it. But Ethan's voice stayed with me. "Stop running from me." Maybe it wasn't just him I'd been running from. Maybe it was everything. So I agreed. We met in a coffee shop near Times Square. My brother looked older, lines etched into his face, but his eyes still sharp. Still familiar, studied me like he didn't know where to start. "You look good," he said, as if the words tasted foreign on his tongue. I shrugged. Surviving. The silence between us was heavy, full of all the years we'd lost. "Finally," he sighed, "I owe you an apology. For everything." I wanted to laugh. To tell him an apology couldn't erase the nights I cried alone, the rejection that burned like acid. But when I looked at him, I saw the same guilt I carried in myself, an ache for what we'd destroyed. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I admitted, "but I don't want to hate you anymore." His eyes softened. "That's enough." When I told Ethan about it later, he didn't push for details. He just pulled me into his arms and whispered, "I'm proud of you." It was such a simple thing, but it broke me open, because no one had ever said that to me before. And in his arms, I realized wasn't just someone who stayed. He was someone who helped me find the pieces I thought I'd lost forever. The weeks that followed were different. I still had fears, doubts that gnawed at me in the quiet moments. But slowly, I stopped letting them control me. I let myself laugh more, breathe easier, and when Ethan reached for my hand in public, I held on instead of pulling away. We built something that wasn't perfect, but it was real. Cooking dinner together, arguing over what movie to watch, waking up tangled in sheets with sunlight spilling across the floor. And somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't waiting for him to leave anymore. I was learning how to stay. The night I told him I loved him wasn't planned. We were walking home through Central Park, the city lights shimmering against the dark sky. He was talking about something, his childhood dog, I think, and I wasn't even listening. I was too busy watching the way his eyes lit up, the way his hands moved as he spoke. It hit me then, like a wave crashing over me. The fear, the doubt, the scars, all of it was still there. But so was this undeniable truth. I loved him. I stopped walking. He turned, confused. "What is it?" I swallowed hard, my chest tight. "I love you." His eyes widened, surprise flashing across his face before it melted into something softer, warmer. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious," I whispered. Ethan smiled, then wide and unguarded, and pulled me into his arms. "I love you too," he said against my ear. And in that moment, under the New York sky, I knew this wasn't just a story about fear or running. It was about finding the courage to stay. Months later, spring arrived. We sat together in Central Park, cherry blossoms drifting around us, the city alive with the hum of possibility. Ethan's hand rested over mine, his head on my shoulder. For once, my chest wasn't tight with fear. It was full, steady, alive. I glanced at him, at the man who was supposed to be a stranger, a one-night mistake. Instead, he became my anchor, my home. My everything. You know, I said softly. You were only supposed to stay for one night. Ethan laughed, squeezing my hand. Guess I'm terrible at goodbyes. And as I leaned in to kiss him, the world around us blurred, leaving only the two of us. Together. Finally. Always. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.